Okay, so think about this for a second. Whether you're sitting in a skyscraper boardroom deciding the fate of billions of dollars, or you're in a local coffee shop thinking about buying the franchise, the fundamental challenge is exactly the same. How do you make a smart bet? Today, we're going to dive into how businesses, both huge and small, make those crucial financial decisions. And what you'll find is that the rules for getting it right are surprisingly universal. So let's break it down.
And make no mistake, the stakes here could not be higher. Warren Buffett called this out decades ago, and it's a problem that's still very much with us. He basically said that the people running many big companies just aren't very good at this one core job. And when they get it wrong, well, the consequences can be massive, not just for the company, but for the entire economy.
So let's start at the very top, in the world of big corporations, where every single decision is measured in billions. Now, in their world, the fancy term for this is capital allocation, and it's widely considered management's single most important job. It sounds complicated, but all it really means is deciding where to put the company's money to get the best possible return in the long run. Simple, right? But incredibly difficult to do well.
Just think about it for a second. Every single dollar a company has can be put to work. It can be reinvested back into the business, it can be used to buy another company, or it can be handed back to the owners, the shareholders. Making the right choice over and over again is what separates the legendary companies from the ones you only hear about when they're restructuring.
So, what kinds of decisions are these big companies making right now? Well, this chart tells a fascinating story. If you look at the last couple of decades, the cost of borrowing money, that's the cost of debt, the shorter bar there on the left, has just plummeted. It's gotten incredibly cheap. Meanwhile, the cost of equity has stayed pretty flat. This has created the widest gap in history, making it just unbelievably tempting for companies to borrow and borrow a lot. It's like the market is shouting at CEOs that debt is on a massive discount.
And what are they doing with all that cheap borrowed cash? This is the kicker. As you can see right here, the amount of new debt they're taking on, shown in that first bar, is almost a perfect match for the amount they're spending on share buybacks, which is the second bar. A share buyback, if you don't know, is just when a company buys its own shares off the market. This reduces the number of shares out there and usually gives the stock price a little boost.
Now, this is where we see the classic mistake in action. The whole point of a buyback is to buy your own stock when it's cheap, right? You buy low. But what does the data show us? This chart compares buyback spending at two very different times. That huge bar on the left, that shows that in 2007, when the market was at an absolute peak, companies were spending hundreds of billions on buybacks. Now look at the shorter bar on the right. That's 2009, after the crash, when stocks were on sale. And what did they do? They bought way, way less. It's a massive, systematic error of buying high.
Okay, so just hang on to that thought of big corporate mistakes for a second and take a look at this number, 96%. What's that about?
Well, that's the percentage of all businesses in Australia that are small businesses. Their decisions aren't about billions of dollars, but for the people making them, they are just as critical, just as life-changing. The scale is totally different, but as we're about to see, the psychology behind the mistakes, it's almost identical.
All right, so let's leave the skyscraper and come right down to the storefront. What does this whole decision-making process look like for an entrepreneur? For a small business owner, the equivalent of capital allocation is something we all know as due diligence. It's basically all the homework you're supposed to do before you sign that contract or write that check. It's about making sure you're not buying a disaster and you're actually making a smart, calculated bet on your future. But here's where things can go wrong so easily. This quote from a first-time franchisee, man, it just says it all. They tried to get advice, but the advice they got was, well, basically a shrug. It really highlights a huge problem. A lot of people just don't know who to ask, or even what good advice is supposed to sound like. And the data really backs this up. The most common thing people do is go see an accountant. But what's really interesting here is that franchisees are more than twice as likely to consult a lawyer as someone starting an independent business. And here's the catch. Often, these professionals are just the family accountant or a friend who does general law, not a specialist who actually understands the insane complexities of a franchise agreement. So now let's bring these two worlds back together. We've got CEOs making billion-dollar blunders, and we've got entrepreneurs making potentially life-ruining $1,000 mistakes. Are they really that different? Honestly, not at all. Both are driven by a simple herd mentality. In the corporate world, Warren Buffett has a great name for it, the institutional imperative. It's this mindless need for CEOs to imitate what other companies are doing, like that share buyback frenzy we just saw. And on Main Street, It's relying on your personal network, using your family accountant for a super specialized business deal, just because it's comfortable and familiar. In both cases, critical independent thinking gets thrown out the window in favor of just following the crowd.
And this just nails the core idea. It doesn't matter if you're looking out from a skyscraper or looking down at a chessboard. The game is the same. It's about strategy, it's about foresight, and it's about having the discipline to make a smart decision based on the facts, not based on what everyone else is doing.
So, how can we all get better at this? Let's put together a simple playbook, a set of rules that works for everyone, from a Fortune 500 CEO to a first-time entrepreneur.
Okay, 4 steps. First, know your true costs. For a corporation, that means not getting seduced by a low interest rate. For an entrepreneur, it's digging into all the hidden costs of a new venture. Second, challenge the herd. You have to ask why. Is this share buyback or this specific franchise a genuinely good idea on its own merits, or are we just doing it because everyone else is? Third, and this is so important, seek specialized advice. Don't use a generalist for a specialist's job. Find the lawyer who only does franchise agreements. And finally, number 4, focus on long-term value. Avoid that temptation to do something that makes the numbers look good this quarter if it's going to hurt the business 5 years from now.
Because ultimately, these ideas, capital allocation, due diligence, they aren't just for business, are they? They're really a framework for making any of life's biggest bets. So the question I want to leave you with is this: beyond business, what's the most important due diligence you need to do for your next big decision?